Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, and I'll be your host for today's show. Today, we're going to take a look at the evolution of the corporate secretaries and probably the board members' skills in the modern governance area. And joining me is somebody who I actually have some history with. Please welcome Lopa Zielinski, who's the Executive Vice President, Corporate Secretary, and Head of Governance at HSBC North America Holdings. Welcome, Lopa.
Thank you, TK. Great to be here.
Yes, and it's great to see you again. So you and I have been in governance for a while. You not as quite as long as me, and that I think is a definite reflection of our difference in ages. But I first met you when you were part of the investment team at TIAA CREF. And I know that you've been in this sort of space since 2004. And here you are now sitting as a sort of a corporate secretary with your organization. And over that time, since 2004, certainly there's been a lot of changes. But what sort of strikes you as the biggest changes when you look at both the board members and the corporate secretaries with respect to sort of the skills necessary and their duties? And one other thing, I'd like that from your career perspective, not necessarily from the HSBC perspective, but over the years in your career.
Yeah, sure. So there's been a lot of changes, and since 2004, it's about nearly 16 years. So, like you, I've had the opportunity to see a lot, and there's a few of us that have really been sort of on the investor side or aspects, and also in the boardroom advising boards as a company secretary. So I take all my experience in totality as valuable. And one of the things I would start by saying is that with respect to board members, fiduciary duties really have not changed. However, the complexity of the topics within their purview, that's changed. And also stakeholder expectations around the skill sets of boards have changed as well. And to provide some examples, what we've seen is there's been a heightened regulatory landscape. So you see, significant regulation has developed, which has put a spotlight on the board's fiduciary obligations. Since Sarbanes-Oxley, certainly we have Dodd-Frank, we have heightened standards for large banks. And, it has been important to have board members that understand the regulatory landscape, and it's proven to be key for many boards during this time. Also, of course, I have to mention, investor engagement. That's evolved over the years, certainly more sophisticated, more developed. You may recall this, TK, maybe 10 years or so, investors were saying, providing advice to boards saying, you should have one or two directors that are camera ready. Now that term was used very often about a decade ago. And even though I'm not fully in the investor space these days, I would argue that that number is likely much higher in terms of, one or two directors. And we're actually seeing more board members there engaging, just out in general, and also with a variety of stakeholders in addition to investors. And so, that has been an interesting development. And, I'd be remiss without also mentioning a heightened focus on ESG. And again, this is a topic that has always been on the forefront for investors. But I think it continues to get heightened focus in the boardrooms. And actually the expectations are that, boards are able to opine in a more granular manner, in a more robust manner with these topics. So, that's just to highlight, some of the changes and some of the evolution we've seen with the complexity of topics. And I have to also add, obviously, as a corporate secretary, we need to be there every step of the way. And to the extent these skills are changing for board members, it certainly impacts our role. My role I view as being in a position to help directors navigate, any of these issues. And I continue to serve as a trusted advisor. I believe that most corporate secretaries these days do as well. And in fact, there's probably a greater reliance on our role as an advisor, given the complexities and the changes in the topics over the years.
Well, I would certainly agree. I think the role of the corporate secretary to make sure the board as effective as possible has grown significantly. Now I'm still surprised a little bit at how, you know, companies differ in the way that they embrace the corporate secretary. But
Hmm.
I think good companies always have a great interrelationship with their corporate secretary because they understand the value of that resource. So, interestingly, Lopa, one of the phrases I hear all the time now is the phrase modern governance. And I know that Diligent has defined it as the practice of empowering leadership with technology, insights, and processes required to fuel good governance at the speed necessary for boardrooms to keep pace with tomorrow's global business environment. And I just want to focus, get your feedback on three things. First, three words. First of all, technology, speed, and tomorrow. Certainly, technology is the only way that you can possibly digest the level of information today, whether that's dashboards, whether that's financial data, no matter what it is, technology is playing very important. Maybe the most important word of those three is speed. The speed of which business happens today. You know, I think about that poor executive that gets on a plane, and by the time they land, if they don't have access to information, you know, all hell can break loose just in that period of time. So the speed of decision making, where before you might have the evening to talk it through, and now you have a matter of minutes, you know, to deal with certain issues sometimes. So it's sort of a breakneck speed. And then when you get to the word tomorrow, you can't operate just on being okay today. You always have to be thinking ahead, okay, to tomorrow. So that now you have the challenge of how do I, as a corporate secretary or as a board member, make sure that my company or my board is staying ahead of the curve, okay? Because you can't wait till, you know, till tomorrow's issues. You got to sort of be ready for them or be prepared. So when you think of this, what should a company board or even a corporate secretary be doing to make sure that their company is ahead of the curve?
So, it's very interesting, TK, you mentioned modern governance. And, my understanding also with regard to the term is that, it helps organizations address governance deficits. But I believe that this concept of modern governance also applies to companies that do not have deficits, in line with what you're saying, to address technology and speed. So, in my view, companies should continually be looking at tools. So one of the things to stay ahead of the curve is to keep current with the tools that's available to companies, and certainly with regard to boards to help power their decision making abilities. And in some instances this could mean to streamline and simplify. And certainly technology has the ability to do this in addition to producing real-time data, real-time information. And that just again speaks to the ability to make informed decisions and with pace. It also, I think, equips board members with the right information at the right time to mitigate risks. I think that's been a key development of, again, correlated to the speed. And, clearly leveraging technology and keeping current with its utility, that's always going to be important. And, if you look at this past year, and there are many companies that continued to operate in a sound manner during the pandemic. And they were able to remain agile and leverage technology. And that allowed them to make real-time adjustments where necessary. So, with respect to board meetings, being able to, quickly collaborate and organize meetings in a virtual setting, being able to have, your board portal up ready to go. And, to your point, to access information in a real-time manner. It allowed, companies to continue to operate, quite frankly. And, a lot of that deals with streamlining the end-to-end processes of governance. And this should be a constant. And in my view, digital solutions, they just help that streamlining to be all the better.
So do you find are boards doing, particularly in the pandemic, but are they doing any kind of strategic retreats, or how are they sort of getting the process of looking ahead and corporate planning? How is that being handled today from your experience with a lot of companies.
Sure. So in my view, I think that, boards are continuing to have their strategic discussions. And, in addition, I would say most boards have separate, strategy days, strategy sessions. In addition, that's a typical part of a board meeting calendar on an annual basis. So, that really has not changed. That continued. So there were separate discussions with regard to strategy, but also I think that most meetings would necessarily involve strategic discussions, especially this year during the pandemic. So, it would be an ongoing agenda item, I would say, for the majority of companies, because again, with all the uncertainties, with being able to address issues in real time in, an ad hoc manner, I would say the strategic focus remained, and if not, was heightened.
Yeah. So last question. So in the NACD's annual public company governance survey for 2019 and 2020, which I'm going to assume was conducted prior to the pandemic, but only 56% of responding board members believe that the information they receive from management is sufficient to support the informed decision making and oversight. So, first of all, I was surprised by that. Okay, number one. And so, here's a two-part question for you. How would you feel if you were back in your investor days hearing
Mhm.
that kind of information? And B, why do you think directors feel that way? And what should be done to change that from your perspective?
So I have to agree with you that I was actually quite surprised myself to see this number. I think it's surprisingly low, and I'll be very interested to see what the next survey data reveals about that particular question. But to address your first question, so as an investor, I would this would clearly be a red flag. There's no other way to look at it in that sense. However, there's likely some case by case application here, in terms of the management information and, having conversations to flesh out sort of the underlying reasons why some directors feel that way. Again, that number is surprisingly low to me. I am fortunate to work with a board that would challenge circumstances if they were not receiving management information that was necessary to make informed decisions. I again fortunate to work with a very engaged board, and as a corporate secretary, I think part of my focus, part of our focus as our role should be on helping to achieve sort of high quality management information, so that continues to help better inform decision making. This is an issue, by the way, TK, that we will always look at. I think for all the years that I've been involved with this type of work, and all the boards that I've supported, it's an issue, quite frankly, that we should continue to look at, because, as I noted earlier, issues that boards are facing are more complex. So that's going to correlate with the type of information that they receive. And as governance professionals, we need to help facilitate the delivery of that information in a way that helps to make boards better informed for their decision making purposes. And certainly corporate secretaries and governance teams can help. And also, to tie in with what we were talking about before, the utilities that are available in technology also. It all ties together. But I would say that yes, I was also surprised, and I do think that the way to make progress in this area is to continue the conversation, in the boardroom and outside the boardroom.
So I was trying to figure out what may cause this number to be low, and the only thing that came to mind is possibly the cyber risk. In the sense that it's so difficult to get one's arms around that maybe that because there's certain you don't know where that risk is coming from, necessarily coming from, whether it's state sponsored, whether it's some hacker, that maybe that was information that the board felt frustrated about. Maybe it's not management's fault per se, but it's just a topic that it's difficult to get your arms around. That's about the only thing I think I could really think about that would lead to a number that was this low for, just like you said, people would be asking, okay,
Hmm.
I need more information to make this decision, or they would actually go out and get outside help, which they're permitted to do as a board, to seek a third party that would be an expert in that space. But still a little surprised.
Yeah, and I think cyber is a key issue that boards deal with and have been dealing with for years. And I think boards that are better situated have tried to address these issues, quite frankly, with, say, for example, director education. I can give an example that we have a very robust director education, in particular to cybersecurity, so that the board is well informed with potential risks or potential issues that could arise, not only with regard to our corporation, but also in the industry and the landscape. And, we have from time to time brought in, outside advisors or engaged with, some of our external auditors that know our company. So I think that there are some best practices probably that could be, beneficial to a lot of boards and, hopefully move that number. And again, I'd be really curious to see what the number is, especially after a year like we've had, where everything has, just essentially been 100% virtual. It'll be really interesting to see where that lands. But I do hope that there is movement and that number, percentage increases, because that is management information, and the delivery of that information is key to having a well informed board and being able to be an effective decision making body.
Well, there's one thing we can count on, Lopa, and that's that it's going to continue to change. And that's what puts so much of a challenge to both boards and certainly to corporate secretaries. So, um, that being said, I wish you good luck. And I want to thank you again for taking the time to join us to talk about this.
Thank you, TK. It's always a pleasure, and again, it was great to be here today.
So that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.